the latest installment of the Presidential Speaker Series here at the University of the Pacific. This new series, started last year, continues a long-standing tradition to bring to our university community thought leaders on the most critical issues facing our nation and world today. Tonight's special guest, Judy Woodruff of the PBS NewsHour, will be interviewed by President Callahan. We will then invite questions from the audience about 2/3 of the way through the hour-long program. Please now silence your cell phones as we prepare to start tonight's program. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage the University of the Pacific's 26th President, President Christopher Callahan.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for a very special evening here in historic Faye Spanos Concert Hall at California's first and oldest university. It is an enormous honor and privilege for me to introduce to our Pacific community Judy Woodruff, the award-winning and groundbreaking journalist of the acclaimed PBS NewsHour. I could easily spend our entire 60 minutes together telling you about this remarkable, pioneering journalist. I will refrain from doing so because we are all here tonight to hear from Judy, but please do allow me a few brief words of introduction. And as a good journalist, I will start with the lead of tonight's story. We are truly privileged to be hearing from an extraordinary journalist who I firmly believe is the gold standard of American journalism. Judy's hallmark over the years has been reporting that is thorough, comprehensive, in-depth, fair, tough, empathetic, tireless, and most importantly, based in facts and not opinions. That is a brand of journalism so many of us have admired in Judy through the years, and a style that, sadly, we see too infrequently in today's news media. And we are so fortunate to have Judy here at this exact point in our nation's rich and very complex history. A Duke University graduate, Ms. Woodruff started her career in local television in Atlanta. Over an extraordinary career spanning the decades, she has covered every presidential campaign since Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford in 1976. She served as White House correspondent for NBC News before moving to the PBS NewsHour in 1983 to serve as the then MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour's chief Washington correspondent and to anchor Frontline with Judy Woodruff. In 1993, she left the NewsHour to serve as CNN's senior correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics. She later moved back to the NewsHour, where she co-anchored the evening news program with her friend and colleague, the late Gwen Ifill. Judy and Gwen were America's first all-female national news anchor team, one of the many, many gender barriers that Judy has broken during the course of her illustrious career. Ms. Woodruff anchored the NewsHour for 11 years before entering the role she holds today as the senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. And she continues her insightful, in-depth reporting in her latest PBS NewsHour project, America at a Crossroads, traversing the country to better understand Americans and our often divided nation. Ms. Woodruff has won virtually every major award in American journalism, including the Peabody Journalistic Integrity Award, a Lifetime Emmy Award, the Radcliffe Medal, and scores of others. I had the personal privilege of bestowing the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism on Judy in 2017. Ms. Woodruff is the founding co-chair of the International Women's Media Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting and encouraging women in communications worldwide. She serves on the board of trustees of the Freedom Forum, the Duke Endowment, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Previously, she was a trustee of the Carnegie Corporation, the Urban Institute, and the Knight Foundation Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. One of the many, many things we can thank Judy for tonight is her leadership role in the creation of the PBS NewsHour's first news bureau outside of Washington, D.C., specifically dedicated to covering issues here in the Western United States, as well as the creation of the West Coast edition of the NewsHour, which so many of us have the opportunity to enjoy and learn from each and every night. Please join me in giving a warm Pacific welcome to tonight's very special guest, Judy Woodruff.
Thank you for that incredible gift. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Judy.
Thank you for that over-the-top introduction. Thank you. I was listening backstage.
It's wonderful to have you here at Pacific.
Thank you.
As you can see, we have a few fans of yours here. Thank you all for being here. Judy, I want to start off with your latest project, which is so fascinating. You're now entering the third year, I believe, of America at a Crossroads, where you're immersing yourself in communities around the country to learn stories of real Americans, forming relationships with them, and hearing their stories, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, and their deep concerns. Tell us a little bit about how they came to be, and what have you learned in your traversing of the country?
Well, I am delighted to do that, but first I have to do the politician's thing, which is to thank you for inviting me to speak at the University of the Pacific. I've known Chris Callahan for several years, going back to your previous incarnation, and someone who was an incredible leader in public media and education at the university, at Arizona State University before he came here. And so when I received the invitation to join all of you, I immediately said yes. So you are very lucky to have this guy as your president. I'm very touched. So the story is, Chris, that as I was thinking about the trajectory, I knew that I was going to stop anchoring. I had been doing it for a long time, as you just reported. I knew I didn't want to stop working. I knew I didn't want to stop reporting. And as I thought about what do I want to focus on, it hit me immediately. It was intuitive. It was, why has our country become so divided? I've been covering American politics for over 50 years, as you said, going back to the Carter-Ford campaign in 1976 and Georgia politics before that. I've never seen Americans as split, as divided, and as angrily divided as we are today. And I thought, I want to understand why that is. And I've been in Washington. I've lived in Washington for over 4 decades. I've covered this city this way and that. I want to go out and talk to the American people. So we came up with the idea of this project where I would travel around America. Over the past 2 years, we've been to 27 states. We've been to communities from Florida to Oregon, from New England to Arizona, to California, of course, and a number of places in between. And we have tried to, in talking to, again, to ordinary Americans, and we've also talked to scholars, we've talked to community leaders, to understand what is it that's at the core of this division. I will tell you that at the outset of this, we went to the Pew Research Center. This is a respected, nonpartisan organization based in Washington. And their researchers go back decades. They are the gold standard, literally, when it comes to understanding American opinion, the shifts in American opinion over time. And what they told us was, not only are Americans, if we were this far apart say 30 years ago. We are this far apart on some of the major issues. Doesn't mean we don't have anything that we agree on. There are some fundamentals, but on the big, most contentious issues of the day, like immigration, like the role of government, abortion, we are farther apart. But the other thing they said that stayed with me and stays with me to this day is how in the last 8 to 10 years, Americans' attitudes of people in the other party have grown darker. Over the last something like 8 years, Republicans' attitude who say they believe most Democrats are dishonest has doubled. The percentage has doubled. It's something like 74%. The percentage of Democrats who believe most Republicans are dishonest, has also increased, not quite by as much, but it's increased. So what we have is a situation where it's not just that people think someone in the other party is wrong, they're misinformed. It's that today more and more Americans are saying, they're not just misinformed, they're a bad person. They're somebody I don't want to spend any time with, I don't want to have a conversation with them. That's not a healthy place to be. And so I wanted to understand why that is, and we can talk about it some more if you want to, but I'll tell you, we started out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I was born. I wanted to go back. I only lived there 5 years. I grew up as a military brat. We lived all over the world as I was growing up. I knew that Tulsa had a terrible blot in its past, and that was the massacre of black citizens by a group of white citizens in 1921, over 100 years ago. The city of Tulsa had basically buried this history, this terrible thing that happened, but it was starting to come to the surface. Young Republican mayor of Tulsa trying to deal with it. He was talking about ways to go and excavate, to find the remains of those who had died, and talking even about what can we do to make it up to the black community today. At the same time, he's dealing with a very conservative groups in the Tulsa area who don't want race taught in the public schools in a way that makes school children feel in any way uncomfortable. So he was dealing with all of these issues. And I could tell you the story of city after city, state after state, but I've come away with an understanding that our divisions do go down to the local level. Yes, it's Washington, it's people yelling at each other across these committee hearings. We're watching these confirmation hearings this week. But it's also something that's seeped into our communities, and it's something that's going to take a lot of work. And so this year, I'll just wrap up very quickly by just saying, this year what I want to focus on is efforts around the country to bridge the divide, to bring people together. And there are lots of efforts like this going on around the country. We don't hear about them very often because so much of the news media focuses, and I'm part of the news media, is focusing on division, on divide, on the fights, on Washington. I want to shine a light on those communities where people are trying to make a difference, trying to bring people together, and we're going to do that for this year. And Chris, I just want to say one other quick thing, and that is we've seen this week in this terrible, terrible plane crash in Washington, D.C., where we lost 46 people? I want to make 67 people, I'm sorry. 67 people, the 64 on the passenger plane and the 3 military officials. It's heartbreaking. The country is riveted by this. That's happened at one end of the country. Just a week or two ago, the country was riveted by these terrible fires here in Southern California. Our hearts go out to the families in Southern California who've lost their homes, people who've lost their lives. From one end of the country to another, we've had these tragedies. We can come together. Hopefully it won't take more tragedies to bring us together as a people to remember we're all in this together. We're all Americans. When some of us suffer, we all suffer. When some of us celebrate, we all ought to be able to celebrate. And so I've been watching what's happening in Washington, watching the outpouring of sympathy from all over. I mean, people here in California, of course, and the whole country is riveted. Our hearts go out. We want to be able to deal with our crises and with our things that we celebrate in ways that bring us closer together.
Are you seeing in your reporting in these communities cause for optimism? It's hard to be optimistic, sometimes.
It
In this deeply divided country, as you noted, the schism is deepening. You've talked before about the grassroots organizations in these communities. Should we just be pessimistic about the future, or in your reporting, are you seeing rays of light for optimism to have a more unified nation?
Well, it's hard to have optimism if you just focus on Washington, D.C. I'm just backstage, I'm reading about... I mean, I hate to say it, I've lived in Washington for, as I said, more than 45 years, and I love the city. My husband and I have raised our children there. It's a beautiful city. It has beautiful people, some really smart people. People come from all over the country to work in the nation's capital, and yet they, frankly, like to denigrate the nation's capital and talk about how terrible it is. And there's, as you know, it's a time of change and turmoil right now with the new administration. But if you look around the country, there are good things happening. There are organizations like Braver Angels, you and I were talking about them, that are working in communities, trying to get people just to sit down over a cup of coffee or over a beer and say, okay, I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, we have completely different views about the role of government, about immigration, you name it. But I don't think you're an evil person. I can have a conversation with you. Maybe we can even come to some points of common ground here somehow. In addition to that, there are efforts in local communities, and just in the last few days I've been reporting here in California. We went to San Bernardino. This is a city that's frankly fallen on hard times. They lost an Air Force base in the early 1990s. They had a number of steel plants leave, and big employers left. They've had an difficult issues with local governance over decade after decade, and they're still continuing to have those difficulties. There's a lot of turnover in city managers. So you could list the problems they've had. Crisis in homelessness, issues around racial tensions, crime, and so on. And yet there are efforts at the grassroots level in San Bernardino to offer hope and opportunity to young people coming from very disadvantaged backgrounds, to offer them a chance to, there's one group called A Fighting Chance. And what it is, it's a program offering young people, again, very difficult circumstances, from the age of 8 on up through high school, to come into this program where they teach them how to box, but also how they push them on academics, on getting their homework done. They play chess, they focus on reading. It's a wraparound kind of program. This was created by people in the community who were worried about what was happening to these kids and their neighbors and their friends. These are kids growing up knowing their cousins and next door neighbors who died in senseless violence. And so that's just one example. But we've heard about example after example in every part of the country. We're going to try to focus on some of these.
Well, we can't wait to hear those reports, so thank you, Judy. So as it turns out, we just had a presidential election. And yes, and President Trump was inaugurated a week ago Monday, so we are on day 11. And there's already been a remarkable amount of activity. I could tell you from a personal standpoint for us at University of the Pacific and at colleges and universities around the country, we had a very interesting 36 hours earlier in the week, where we found out on Monday, by reading the New York Times and other news media, that all federal funding was being frozen, which is a huge problem for higher education, among many other sectors. Our leadership team met immediately the first thing Tuesday morning. Before we finished that meeting, we had gotten word from the U.S. Department of Education that this would not affect our unbelievably important federal funding to our students through grants and loans, so that was a big relief. And by the end of that day, of course, there was a temporary restraining order to put a hold on the freeze order for other federal funding, which of course affects many of our faculty members in federal research. The next day, we had heard that they were rescinding the freeze, and then later there was a little confusion about...
They rescinded the rescission.
Yes, so, and that was just from, I hate to be selfish, but that was just from our little point of view here. So, so I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you think the second Trump administration is going to be different from the first, and what should we be looking for as news consumers? What signals should we be looking for?
Well, I think you already see it. As you said, he's been in office 11 days, President Trump, and there has been a blizzard of executive orders, pronouncements. They've even passed, a piece of legislation around immigration and cracking down on anyone who has committed a crime of any proportion, who's in this country without documentation. It is what some of the people around President Trump are calling flood the zone. Get as much out there. Some of us in the news media are looking at it as a fire hose, trying to understand one executive order after another, pronouncing that there are only two genders, saying there will be no more aid, government aid, going to for gender-affirming care. Executive orders having to do with immigration, and we know that ICE is out in a number of communities around the country. What we don't know yet is how deeply they are going to go into Hispanic and other communities around the country. Are they, for example, I understand California has I believe this is correct, 270-some thousand children in school, K through 12, without documentation. Are they going to go into the school systems? We don't know. And so many questions remain to be answered, just like this sweeping order that, as you said, was announced one day, that to stop all government program, all government money going out the door, and then the next day to say, well, no, it's been rescinded, but then the White House clarified that by saying, well, no, it's not all rescinded, that we are still going to go ahead with it. There's a lot of confusion. People are, I think it's fair to say there is turmoil. There's been an order that's gone out to federal employees urging them to take buyouts, to leave their jobs. They've been told that they have so many days to accept it, and if they don't, they'll be terminated. Some of these people who are being pushed out are people with years and years of experience, so there is anxiety about how much expertise and experience is walking out the door all at one time. We don't know how much is going to be acceptable by the new administration. There are just, again, so many questions. There was an announcement, Chris, with regard to foreign aid. At first they said no more foreign aid, period. And then they ended up clarifying and saying, no, we can do this, this, and this. But it ended up as a pretty sweeping order. And the sense everyone is getting is that this is an administration, and President Trump himself has said it, where things are going to be different. I think what you were looking at is a much more confident president than what we saw in the first term. He is every bit the brash, outspoken Donald Trump that he was, but this time the guardrails, whatever guardrails there were in the people he surrounded himself with in his cabinet or in his White House staff, that has changed. Now, everyone, I think it's fair to say, who's been chosen to serve in the cabinet is extremely loyal to this president. It's been a criterion that is first and foremost. You could tell that in their statements, in their confirmation hearings. The same thing about the White House staff. Everyone has been vetted. And the question we have is, as they change the departments, the federal departments, one after the other, whether it's agriculture, transportation, environmental protection, you go on and go on down the list, are they going to insist that the people who stay all declare some sort of loyalty oath to President Trump? And if so, what does that mean? So again, no more James Mattis's, who was the defense secretary in the first administration. This is a cabinet of fierce loyalists. So they are going to be strongly inclined to carry out his orders. And so if there's an order that bumps up against a court decision, what will they do? If it bumps up against the Constitution, as in the president's order this week to end birthright citizenship, something that is in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, then what's going to happen? A judge, several judges have already ruled on it. One said it was blatantly unconstitutional. So to answer your question, I can't tell you what's going to happen over the next 4 years. I will say that he has a knack for keeping all of us on our toes. American citizens, the news media who are trying diligently, my colleagues at the NewsHour are trying diligently to follow every order that's coming down, to read it. And today, his statement, and I'll just add this, you didn't ask, but in the wake of the plane crash, I don't know how many of you were able to listen or watch the president today. He basically said that he tied the plane crash to policies by President Obama and President Biden to have diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Federal Aviation Administration, and I don't know about the NTSB and other agencies. Now, there's no evidence of that in any way. The investigation is very early. People are still grieving the loss of these families, but that statement is out there, and of course everyone is scrambling to understand how could that have played a role. And you know, the answer to your question is, I don't know, but please, as American citizens, stay tuned.
Okay, good. That's good advice. Thank you, Judy. Judy, let's turn to our shared passion, journalism and the news media. We've seen seismic shifts in the news media in recent years, dramatic changes in technology and competition, in some cases in values and ethics, in mission, in the economic model, and so much more. Take a minute to help us look at today's news media. Are there things that you're seeing that are actually better than they have been in the past? What are your deepest concerns about the changes that are negative? And most importantly, where do you see us going forward in the news media?
It's such an important question right now. As somebody who loves journalism, who has dedicated my adult life to working as a journalist, and you're somebody who knows this so well yourself, Chris. I mean, I will tell you, we're like night and day in the press. From the time I started out as a reporter in 1970, we were still using film. In a way, it was the dark ages of media. We've gone from using film and running it through the processor, the soup we used to call it, to process the film so we could get it on the air, and doing long reports on the local news about what happened to the state legislature that day. Everything has changed. The technology has changed. We went from that to videotape to digital to today. Everything it's electronic. It's just a push of a button, or not even the push of a button, a blink of an eye, and there's a transmission. With the technology has changed, the business model has changed. Public media is something separate. We can talk about that. But the business model, newspapers, which used to be what everybody in my family, I mean, when I grew up seeing, hearing about, and people I know who work in journalism today, we all grew up with the major national papers, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and others, the Los Angeles Times out here on the West Coast, the New York Times. I mentioned the Washington Post. To today, local newspapers around the country have been decimated. We've lost something like 2,500 local newspapers around the country over the last maybe decade and a half. We've lost tens of thousands of reporters. All that institutional memory, understanding, experience has gone out the window. Why? Because people figure they could get their news for free. And we celebrate digital, we celebrate the internet, online. We can get so much information. If I had my smartphone with me now, I'd hold it up. We can get all that at the again, the blink of an eye, the click of your thumb. So there are good things that have happened. No question. We've got all this. We're swimming in a sea of information and entertainment. It's all around us. It's everywhere. On the other hand, we are also swimming in a sea of opinion. So to me, what's changed for the better is that more people have access to more information. However, we don't have the editing of information. I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I was taught in the beginning that it was supposed to be about gathering facts. I was told, Judy Woodruff, Judy, my producer at a local station in Atlanta, CBS affiliate, said, all right, Judy, go to the state capitol. Your job is to report on what's going on, take notes, come back, give us a story and put it on the air. Nobody gives a damn, he said, what Judy Woodruff thinks. And I said, all right. Okay. Not that I thought anybody would, but 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 that's what I've absorbed. That's been my mantra all these years. Today, I think we are in a much more opinion-driven era where many people, I think, can spend all day long only listening to, reading, and watching news that conforms to their opinions, whether it's right or left. And yes, we still have legacy news organizations, the PBS NewsHour, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and other newspapers that are surviving and reporting the best they can. The wire services that, thank goodness, are still there and get picked up, although they are very financially strained. But it is just a much different time. It's much harder to get information you can count on. The information you heard the White House, I guess 2 days ago, the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said they were opening up a seat for what the White House is calling new media. They're inviting in podcasters, bloggers, influencers who may or may not conform to journalism standards. I guess they have a right to do that. Up until now, by the way, the White House Correspondents Association, it was their responsibility for reporters to hold other reporters to a standard. Are you practicing journalism in a way that is up to journalism standards? Now there's a possibility that people will be there. And it's not that we don't have people who lean left and right at covering the White House. There are conservative news organizations and liberal. But it's a bow to the fact that we have a much more open and undefined media environment today than we've ever had. And I look to the younger, I don't know how many of you are students here, or many of you have children or grandchildren. It is up to this younger generation, in my view, to figure out how we tell the difference between news we can trust and news that we can't trust. Because right now, we're having a really hard time with that. I mean, I know news organizations, I'm confident. I can tell generally what news to trust, although we all know that you should be careful about anything you read. If your Aunt Betty sends you something on Facebook, check it out. Unless it's I had a wonderful Aunt Betty. So, but the fact is, it's now we've all become our own news editors and vetters. We need to make sure if somebody sends you something, check it out. If it doesn't look right, sound right, check it out. We cannot any longer assume that news is something that's legitimate. And frankly, with the advent now of AI and all that means, that people are going to be able to create. We know there's already misinformation and disinformation out there. That comes with the turf, especially in our election years. But the fact that AI can create these fake videos, copy, just making things up out of whole cloth, we are all going to have to be much tougher at figuring out what to believe.
Judy, let me ask you, what is your daily news habit? Where do you consume your news and how?
Well, while I'm sleeping, I have it going nonstop. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Chris, there are not enough minutes in the day to follow everything. I'd love to tell you that I read everything I want to read, every article, every opinion piece, every magazine piece, every blog, there are now some really valuable magazines I like to read, The Atlantic and others that are doing extraordinary reporting. There are online political, what I call they're aggregators, where they aggregate information. They sometimes will make it easier if you don't have time to read every story in the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times or the Houston Chronicle, you name it. You can look at these aggregators. But there's just so much. And not to mention Twitter/X, where so many journalists and people who are citizens are posting information. What a citizen notices can become important in our work as journalists. So it's coming from everywhere, and we have to take a deep breath and figure out, what are we going to pay attention to? I tell you, I count on my colleagues at the NewsHour. I happen to be married to another journalist. He will sometimes say, did you see this? Did you read that? So we all have to have our own systems. But I have to be much warier than I used to be, and so do we all. It's just tougher today.
No, that's a wonderful analysis, as we would expect. But let's now turn from news to public television more broadly. Obviously, fantastic, loyal viewers here of PBS, not just the NewsHour, but a lot of other PBS content. Where are we? What changes have you seen at PBS? What are the challenges going forward? And perhaps, what are the opportunities? Where do you see public television going here in the United States?
Well, I love this question. And first of all, I want to toot the horn of my colleagues at the PBS NewsHour. I think Amna Nawaz, Jeff Bennett are doing a fantastic job anchoring the NewsHour. And they are supported by an amazing team of correspondents. Lisa Desjardins, Nick Schifrin, who covers foreign affairs for us, Laura Barone-Lopez, who is amazing, and I could name so many more. Jeff Brown, who covers the arts and writing and music and everything that is art for us. Paul Solman, who covers economics, and the list goes on, and the special correspondents. Thank you. I mean, I'm going to share with them that they all got a huge applause. And an amazing team of people you never see on camera behind the scenes, who are producers, writers, researchers, editors, and the list goes on. People who work in digital only, people who work on the television program only. Pretty much everybody in one way or another gets today involved in digital. What you see on television every day, that 1 hour, is now cut up into pieces and pushed out on YouTube, on TikTok, Instagram, because we are trying to reach all of our viewers, all of our potential viewers, especially younger folks who do not sit in front of a TV set at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night. They're watching, they're looking at YouTube, or they may pick up an aggregator somewhere. So we know we have to get the message out, and my colleagues, in my humble opinion, are doing an incredible job of doing that. And again, on a public media budget, which is nowhere near what our commercial colleagues have to work with. But you asked, Chris, about where is public media headed. I mean, I have to say that, to me, public media has been one of the great gifts to this country ever since and I have to go back and give credit to Newton Minow, who in 1961, I believe it was, he was the head of the Federal Communication Commission under President John F. Kennedy, and he gave a speech in which he was, and this was before really very much had happened, about the state of broadcast television. And he used a term, and he called it the vast wasteland. This was in the 60s, so this was only a decade or so after television had even come into being. And he was saying it was already going in a direction of too much commercialism, and we lost Newton Minow just last year, an amazing human being, and I became good friends. He became a very, very dear friend. But I give him enormous credit at the Kennedy administration. It all happened under LBJ, President Lyndon Johnson. They created Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and we were off and running with public radio, public television, moving kind of on separate tracks, but growing. And the most important thing we've done is we are embedded in communities all over the United States. There are something like 355 public television stations. There are probably more than that. I don't know the exact number. Public radio stations. There's National Public Radio. There's Public Radio PRX, which I'm on the board of. This is another public radio organism that is promoting podcasts and promoting news as any which way we can get it out on the public media spectrum. And I think what we've done is we have continued to focus on the highest standards of information, entertainment, yes, education, and constantly thinking the public is who we are here to serve. What is it that the public needs? Education has come first, and I think Paula Kerger, who's the president of PBS, would say that. Education has been in our mission from the very beginning. We have affiliations with a number of K-12 public school systems around the country. We have affiliations with universities. I know there was a public radio connection with this university for a while in the past. That still is the case with a number of other schools around the country. So that education mission, again, the information mission, the news mission, entertainment, and entertainment at an uplifting level, if you will. I don't want to say highbrow, that sounds elitist and like we know better than you and everybody else. We're not all just classical music. It's as much as I love classical music, it's all kinds of music. It's an attention to people where they are. It's country music, folk music, it's the arts. And so, and it's children. And I should have mentioned that at the outset. I mean, when you think about between Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, the two iconic programs on public television, how many children, my children, were raised watching these programs, and I know millions of American children were as well. So when I think about the contributions to public media, I think, wow, where would we be without it? You asked about the future. We are clearly in a different place when it comes to the financial picture. It has, in the beginning, I know at the NewsHour, it was much easier to enlist corporate underwriting. Today, that's more difficult. There is still some corporate support, but a lot of foundation support, more and more individuals. We still do the, if you'll send us a check or tell us your credit card number, we'll give you a mug, a coffee mug, and a tote bag. We're always glad to do that. That has grown tougher over time. It's just natural. There's a lot of competition out there for survival. And we face, as is often the case with Republican administrations, there's conversation about should the federal government be putting money, as it does, through congressional appropriations, through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, to public radio and public television. It is not all of our funding. It is a percentage. It's a meaningful percentage. It's not a percentage that we want to go away. And we believe that it should be sustained because we believe we serve the American people at a fundamental level. And so we'll see. I mean, there's conversation about whether this administration will try, as previous President Nixon, for example, tried to cut funding. Various Republican administrations have. We'll see what happens now. I think what I put my faith in is the work that we're doing across the board, and also, again, in these local connections that the stations have. They are embedded in the communities. So often it's community leaders who are on the boards of or directing local public radio and public television. So I'm counting on those local roots, those local relationships to keep us strong.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. At this point, we'd love any audience members who want to come up to, we have two microphones on the end of either aisle up by the stage, and Judy would love to entertain some of your questions. While you're coming up, I'll have one more. And it is a project that you were central in driving in, which was, of course, the West Coast News
Yes.
Bureau in Phoenix, and the PBS NewsHour West, which we all get to enjoy every night.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that, why you were so passionate to have a bureau outside of DC and to have a separate West Coast edition of the NewsHour.
Well, what has happened to the media over time, and it happened to us even at the NewsHour, is that so many of us in the news media have gravitated to the East Coast. We are based in Washington, D.C., most of us probably. There are a lot in New York, Atlanta, and other capitals around the country, but so many of us are in Washington. And frankly, over time, I think we have developed a kind of media bubble mindset. We see the world from Washington, D.C. We haven't gotten out in the country. We don't get out in the country enough. Sure, we can send a correspondent to Topeka or to Dallas or to Phoenix or whatever. But we felt, and this is going back about, 10 years when the NewsHour started having conversations with Chris Callahan when Chris Callahan was at Arizona State University and their Cronkite School, the public television station in Phoenix. And we felt it was critical that at a point when the NewsHour was growing and changing with a new executive producer, that we wanted to have a West Coast presence. And most people would say, well, that automatically means, well, you must mean Los Angeles. You must mean, one of the big cities in California. And that was originally what we thought, but we started having conversations with these amazing, smart people in Phoenix and realized that what they had to offer with all that Arizona State was doing with this robust and extremely well-led station in Phoenix, we had the opportunity to work, frankly, with the best. They had created a model of journalism. They were already doing journalism covering their community. They had a fantastic group of students working their way through the Cronkite School, the School of Journalism at Arizona State. So they had a group of young people who wanted to work, wanted to learn, and we wanted that West Coast presence. So we signed on the dotted line, and it's been fabulous. And every night when you watch the NewsHour, you'll see, the NewsHour comes to you from our studios in Washington, D.C., and from the Walter Cronkite Studios at Arizona State University. So we are a national broadcast. And yes, we go on the air live from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on the East Coast every night. That's 3 to 4 p.m. your time. But we have an update, a live update coming out of Phoenix at 6 o'clock Pacific. So that's 9 o'clock our time. That update, some nights there's not much to update. Other nights the whole world has changed. A whole lot of news has happened, and a whole lot of things have to be updated. We think that's critical. And sometimes there are segments in the show that have to be updated.
Yes. Well, we're so appreciative of your leadership on that because it makes a big difference to all of us here in the Western United States.
We love the West Coast.
Yes, so thank you.
We don't just live, hopefully we don't just live in a bubble, but it's why I like to get out on the road and talk to real people, talk to people.
Oh, and speaking of people, let's start with some of our audience questions. We can't quite see you, but just go ahead and jump right in, and then we'll just
Hi, Ms.
alternate.
Woodruff. You talk
Hello.
with your hands, so I'm guessing we don't see your hands on TV, that you found a way to keep them from being seen. My question for you is, we haven't really experienced somebody so close to power, the first buddy. And if you could say something about him and about the leaders of Russia and China, maybe give us some insight from your having been around people that know them or know, what's potentially going to happen. Thank
Okay,
you.
you're going to need to repeat a little bit closer to the microphone because
sorry.
I had
A little hard. I had a hard time too.
Oh, let me
yeah.
say it again.
I heard close to power, and I heard Russia and China.
Yes. Basically asking you if you can give us some insights on the first buddy.
Oh, first buddy, meaning,
You know.
do you mean,
And the leaders of
Oh,
Russia
Elon
and
Musk,
China,
okay.
and if you had in your context some views about those three people.
I heard Elon Musk, first buddy. Are you asking me about Xi and Putin?
Yes.
Okay. Well, since I don't speak with them on a regular basis, or any basis, frankly, as much as I would love to interview all three of them, I have to say that, this is one of the things we in the news media are watching very, very closely. We knew that Elon Musk had moved in the direction of favoring Donald Trump. I guess years ago the two of them didn't see eye to eye, but today they are bosom buddies, as you just described. He and some other tech titans had a better seat at the inauguration, you may have noticed, than did members of the cabinet. I think, again, we are very early in this administration, and we have to watch closely to see what develops. As you all know, Mr. Musk has been put in charge along with, Mr. Ramaswamy, although he's now exited, and we hear he's going to run for governor of Ohio. But they were put in charge of this so-called Department of Government Efficiency. It's not truly a government department. It is an office in the White House that is going to scrub the federal government. They are looking to cut the number of employees, to make it more efficient. A lot of presidents have come to Washington, my experience going back to Jimmy Carter, who came to Washington saying we're going to create a more efficient government. It's a worthy goal, and there's no question there is some waste, fraud, and abuse and so forth, but is it as much as some of the politicians would have us believe on the campaign trail? I don't know. And I think I think everybody wants it to be more efficient. We all want to believe that our tax dollars are being spent in the wisest, most efficient way possible. We don't want to think there's any waste anywhere. And so to the extent they're going to scrub it and figure that out, that's good. If they go beyond that, if there are decisions made that are based more on politics and on who's loyal to whom, then it becomes something that I think we want to question. But we'll see. We are still very, very early. I have questions about how one person, I guess, can run Tesla, the space program, Twitter, X, and do this whole government efficiency thing. But we will see. And with regard to Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin, again, we're not on a regular phone call basis, so I don't think I can answer your question. I have noticed this. President Trump has not had a great deal to say yet about President Xi since the inauguration, other than, I guess today or yesterday, they announced they're still talking about tariffs. And so we don't know. There was a big tariff, and then there was a small tariff, no tariff, some tariff. We'll see. And with regard to President Putin, as you know, during the campaign, President Trump was talking about we need to end the war on day one. We need to, even if it means, the suggestion being, even if it means that Ukraine has to give up territory that Russia has taken illegally. But in the days after that, after the inauguration, he talked to Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and said that, well, Mr. Putin needs to come to the table and be prepared to make some concessions. He said, Mr. Zelensky's ready to make concessions, we need Mr. Putin. That's a different approach from what we heard during the campaign. So again, we're all waiting. My colleague Nick Schifrin, other reporters, David Sanger, who covers foreign affairs for the New York Times, I noticed him in the White House briefing room this morning when President Trump came out to talk about the plane crash. They're all looking for answers to these very questions that you're asking. I think you want to be alert, keep watching, keep listening.
Yeah, keep tuned in. Let's go to this side.
Hi.
Hello, and thank you very much, Judy. A few weeks before the election, the owner of the Los Angeles Times and the owner of the Washington Post declined to publish editorials that had already been written supporting the Democratic candidate for president. In recent weeks, both ABC and CBS have decided not to pursue or not to fight lawsuits launched by President Trump, and instead have settled out of court. Just this past month, the Nobel Prize-winning New York Times columnist Paul Krugman left the newspaper, and I was really surprised to learn in the last couple of days why he left, and that was because he was very upset that the New York Times editors were taking issue with some of the things that he was writing. He did not mention precisely what it was, but it's no secret that he was an outspoken critic at times of President Trump. My question to you is something taking place at PBS? Oh, the incoming FCC chairman has been very vocal about wanting to remove the funding from PBS and CPB. So I'm wondering, what if anything is happening at the NewsHour in regard to handling possible threats to your funding, to your editorial content, and what the implications might be because of his posture towards the news media?
Well, you put a lot into your question. There's a lot that's been going on with regard to the news media, as you point out, both before the election and since. I think each one of the instances you mentioned deserves its own examination. They each happened in a different set of circumstances and for different sets of reasons. Overall, yes, the impression is that there is a wariness now on the part, a worry on the part of those in the news media who own newspapers, who also do business with the government, about their ability to continue to do business and a lot of business with the government if their news organizations are taking political positions that the administration doesn't approve of. I don't have inside information about those decisions by Mr. Soon Shong or by the New York or by Mr. Bezos at the Washington Post. All I can do is look at what's happened. I know there's been, unfortunately, an exit of journalists from the Washington Post. A few, in fact, a few good friends have moved to other news organizations. And with regard to the legal cases you mentioned, I don't have inside information about what happened with ABC and CBS other than what's been reported in the news. What I can tell you with regard to public media is basically what I said earlier, that I'll just say this very flatly. I view our job is to report, to go out and seek the facts every day and to report them faithfully. And as long as we can do that, we are doing our job. And we cannot worry about how we are being interpreted, whether we are seen as left or right. I don't think it is our job to pick fights with any president or politician. That's not what we do. We weren't, I didn't go into this work, as I suggested, to get into fights with the politicians that I cover, or any public officials. And by the way, the role of a journalist in holding the powerful accountable, it's holding all the powerful accountable, and that includes whether they're in business, or they run a hospital system, or they're an elected official. I mean, or a military leader. Our job is to be the eyes and ears for the American people. And that means to ask questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions, of people who are making decisions that affect your lives and the lives of your children, your family, and your future. Our job is to be your eyes and ears. And it doesn't get any more complicated than that, and it isn't any simpler than that. And so, if someone wants to attack us because we weren't sufficiently loyal in one direction, Democrat or Republican, I don't know what we can do about it. I do think this whole question of as I mentioned earlier, we've had a revolution in the business model for journalism. We are now. We can't sell enough advertising. It just doesn't work that way. We have to find, I mean, cable television survives that way. What am I saying? They do, I guess, quite well with advertising and subscriptions and so forth. But we have to find, many of us have to find other ways to survive economically, financially. And in so doing, if there's a billionaire owner of a newspaper or any news organization who on the side is doing business with government, there can be a conflict potentially. And that's something that's going to have to be worked out. I will just say this about the New York Times. I don't know Paul Krugman's reasons for leaving. I know other New York Times columnists who are very, generally a few, who are supportive of President Trump. There are several who are very critical of President Trump, and they're not leaving. So I don't know. I'm not ready to say that I know what happened with Paul Krugman, but you do put your finger on a troubling set of circumstances of instances of what's going on. We're all watching it very closely. But I tell my colleagues at the NewsHour, do our job, focus on our job, report, 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 stick to the facts, and let the chips fall where they may. Our job is not to pick sides or to pick fights. We're not here to pick fights, to pick out a point and to make a point. And so I know that's what commentators do. There's a lot of that going on in the media. You can turn on your radio, your television, turn on your laptop, and you'll find it easily. But that's not our job at the NewsHour. I don't think it's our job in public media, and we'll see where we end up. But right now, I think what my colleagues at the NewsHour are doing is exactly the right thing, and that's reporting, reporting, reporting. That's what we need to do, and to be as faithful as we can to the facts.
Thank you, Judy. Please.
Hi. I have a question. I want your perspective on political media. I'm 18, so this was my first election. I was, legal. And I've seen in these congressional meetings, representatives fighting with each other. Like, you have Marjorie Greene and Jasmine Crockett and, like, the little insults that's thrown. And I thought it was crazy. But I wanted your perspective on how do you feel about when these news media outlets are covering, in a way, kind of like these embarrassing stories of our government, and the way it's marketed towards Gen Z, and how a lot of us are either like very much want to be active and fight, or we're very much like we're discouraged because what's being represented in our current state of government. So how do you feel about political media and what's being represented?
Okay, I'm still having a hard time hearing. I'm hearing you say social media covering the hearings. So you're asking me about social media coverage, is that it? I'm sorry.
More like political media, not really social, more political, like just general news outlets like the ones you've been working with.
Political media, meaning all of media, is that? Sure. I mean, the media, the journalists who cover politics, is that?
Okay, I'll try to simplify, I know we're on a time crunch. Just the overall coverage of politics in the United States, and how we've seen these congressional meetings and how they haven't represented our government really well. And as Gen Z, I was wondering, like, do you have any advice for us young people who are watching the government kind of like just crumble, or quote unquote crumble in our faces? What do you have to say for us who are consuming the media with this?
Yeah, I think you're asking me about the coverage of the hearings and and I gather you're saying the coverage you think is not accurate, it's distorted. Are you talking about on cable television or radio or
I think
print?
It's cable. It's live television, but it's also been on TikTok and all that. So.
Yeah. And I haven't been able to follow that. I've been on the road
that's
this
right.
week.
Yeah.
I watched a fair amount of the hearings last week, and mostly I was watching it on C-SPAN. I was trying to watch the unfiltered, Q&A back and forth on some of the earliest. I think it's a gift that we can watch these confirmation hearings. I'm glad they're being covered. Clearly, they are not getting as much coverage in the last day or two because of the terrible, tragic plane crash. The media has been diverted to cover that, understandably. So we're not having as much coverage of today. It was Kash Patel to head the FBI. It was Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Intelligence, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the head of Health and Human Services. All three of those very contentious hearings. I don't feel equipped to answer your question about how well do I think they're being covered on TikTok, because what I've been watching have been kind of the unfiltered live hearings when I've been watching them. I would hope, it's based on what I was saying a minute ago. I think there's too much opinion journalism out there right now. I would hope that there would be more just straight on, honest, factual reporting. So to the extent any journalist is putting a spin on what they're hearing and seeing, I don't think that's a service to the country. It's all well and good to have an opinion, but be sure and identify that as opinion and not what you've reported on. To your final part of your question, which I hope I understood, was what do I say to the younger generation watching all this, and it has to be discouraging to watch so much division in Washington. I'll just say this, I mean, it's where we are, but it hasn't always been like this. I came to Washington to cover Jimmy Carter at a time when, yes, he had fought a tough campaign with Jerry Ford, and yes, Democrats and Republicans disagreed, but not the way they disagree today. What's happened over time is we've seen the two political parties become much more possessive, if you will, about the way they demand members of their own party vote a certain way, and if you don't vote our way, you're not going to get that chairmanship of the committee you want, or we're not going to give you money for your reelection, or we may even run somebody against you, which we are now hearing as a more frequent threat of senators, Republican senators, who are even thinking about not voting for one of President Trump's cabinet nominees. The word has gone out among many of the president's supporters, we're going to run somebody against you. That's the part of politics today that has gotten, again, so much more oppositional, so much more personal, and in my mind, not as healthy. So what I hope for your generation is to know that it can be different, that hopefully we are going through a cycle right now, that we'll be able to get to a point where, not that everybody agrees, we know that's not going to happen. People are going to have different opinions. A democracy is all about having different opinions and being able to debate them, but being respectful of the other side, of understanding that it's okay to have a different opinion, but not to accuse the other person of being evil or unpatriotic or of being contemptuous of them. And that's what I think we have to work on. And I'm looking to your generation to find ways to do that. I thought that the Episcopal bishop in the prayer service at the Capitol last week, Mary Ann Buddy, I know her a little bit. She's remarkable. She's just a very strong and courageous, tiny, courageous woman who preached a sermon a sermon. Sorry, well, I'm thinking about the Carter.
Yes, no.
I'm thinking about the Jimmy Carter service. Forgive me. She also was one of the officiants there, but her message was, please, to President. She said, I would say this to any president: please be mindful of the American people who are scared, as she put it, when you are making decisions about what to do, and that there's a way. And I've heard her interviewed on the radio in the last few days, and she said, I'm sort of copying what she said. She said basically that people, we need to be able to view people on the other side as respected American citizens and not as people we just have contempt for. We need to get away from that, and I think your generation is capable of taking us in that direction. So thank you. It's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And we are at the point in the evening where I will be the most unpopular person in the room because we need to start wrapping things up. Because Judy is so generous with her time and her thoughts, we have cards for anybody who didn't have the opportunity to ask a question that you can write your name and your email and your question on this. We will collect them, get those back to Judy's team, and you will hear back. So, and that says so much about Judy Woodruff.
It's my fault for giving such long answers. I apologize for all of you who didn't get to ask a question.
No, this was marvelous. I'm going to take the prerogative of asking one final question. I apologize for the cliche nature of it, but I think it's an important one. And many of our students are up there because they can do a much job of navigating the stairs. So that's where many of them are. So Judy, let us ask you. We have students here who want to be scientists and engineers and pharmacists and business people and poets and artists and psychologists and all running the gamut, and they're looking forward to the rest of their lives. What advice do you have for them as they start their journey?
Oh, wow. I love the description of all of them, that you're all thinking of in so many different fields of going into, as you said, whether it's science or philosophy or the tech world or business or religion, whatever it is. I salute you. You are, the wonderful thing about this country is that each generation has the opportunity to not just address the problems that our generation, the previous generation, created, but to begin to make the country something closer to the image of what our founders wanted us to be. And that is a democratic society where people have opportunity, where people can pursue their dreams. I truly believe the United States is getting closer to that dream. We are better today than we were when we were founded. We've taken in so many people from all over the world, unlike every other country on the planet. We invite people to come in. Right now, we're having a pause. I know that. But we have brought in so many people from so many places, and we offer them an opportunity to not just make us a better country, but to create opportunity for others. So I can't say it any better than pursue your dream, whether it's you want to be a nurse or a doctor or an engineer or a business person or a minister, whatever, a journalist, please, go into politics. Please go into politics. Whatever you want to do, pursue your dream, and don't be deterred by all the kind of the ugly language flying around right now, whether it's in Washington or you hear it on your local radio station or wherever or on the internet or on TikTok or whatever. Don't be deterred by some of this negativity that's around you. Look for the positive, look for the silver lining. It is there. I have ultimate faith in the American people. I certainly have faith in your generation. You are our hope for the future. We are going to get through our difficulties. There's no question in my mind that we will. And we just look to all of you to make a difference. You're going to do it. And I'm just so proud of you. And I'm so honored to be here with all of you.
Judy, I'm going to put you on the spot in front of everybody.
Uh-oh.
Will you come back and see us again?
I'd be honored.
Thank you.
Honored.
Ladies and gentlemen, Judy Woodruff.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What can I say? Thank you. I'm so touched. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm coming to see you.